Welcome. So welcome to College of Education Dean's EduTalk with Dean Ryan Gildersleeve, titled Community plus Value and the Future of Education. I am Dr. Imandeep Kaur Grewal. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Teacher Education. I also direct the Office for Place-Based Education in the Next Scholars Program. As we begin our conversation about values, community, and the future of education, let us take a moment to honor by remembering those whose shoulders we stand on, individually and collectively, people living in past, communities existing and erased. Thank you for each of you for making the choice to be here today. Rituals such as greetings and acknowledging the presence of others are an important part of creating and maintaining community. So in my culture, we greet each other by folding hands and bowing our head. So I would like to offer this opportunity for each of you to take a moment and greet those around you in whichever manner you so wish. You can stand, you can sit, you can walk around. Thank you all. Isn't it wonderful to be back in person and having meetings and gatherings in person? This is not something we can do on Zoom. So what a lovely moment there. Whatever it is, coronavirus has made the mighty kneel and brought the world to a halt like nothing else could, writes Arundhati Roy, an Indian novelist and activist in her latest book, Azadi, Freedom, Fascism, and Fiction. Historically, she states, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our dead ideas, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world. Nothing, Arundhati warns, would be worse than a return to normality. We, the College of Education community, are honored to have Dr. Ryan Gildersleeve lead the work of imagining and creating our new world, our new normal. A brilliant scholar leader, Dr. Gildersleeve leads with compassion, care, empathy, and vulnerability. His actions intentionally reflect his value for justice, equity, inclusion, collaboration, creativity, and innovation. Bringing us together today for a talk weaving value, community, and the future of education exemplifies this. Dr. Ryan Gildersleeve before Dr. Ryan Gildersleeve begins his talk, I would like to welcome President Smith and thank him for being here. And I offer him the opportunity to share a few remarks.
First of all, welcome everyone. It's good to see you. It's good to be in 3D. Some of you know this story because I've told it several times that I ran into a student as we were finishing summer B, and we were talking about what might be required to come back to classes for the fall. And she said, Dr. Smith, I'll wear a mask, I'll wear a shield, I'll do anything to get out of my grandmother's damn basement. So I agree with you, Dr. Graywall, that it's great to see all of you in 3D. And we're not done with, maybe we're done with COVID, but COVID's not quite done with us. So I think we're all being cautious, but it is good to be back. Dean Gildersleeve asked if I would do some kind of advanced organizers of what we're going to experience here and tie it all together. And then I did read again that Casey Wooster said brief. So I will indeed be brief, Ryan. I want to thank all of you for your support. Some of you have supported the college for a number of years. I think almost everyone in this room knows how fundamentally important this college is to the university, our history, who we are, what we will be in years to come. Some of you may not know that this college is incredibly important to me because I hold tenure in leadership and counseling. And you know, there may be a day where the board wants me to not be president anymore, and I will look forward to coming back to home. And I did tell a doctoral student a year or so ago that I was once a pretty credible ed policy faculty member, and the person says, well, does that mean you're not credible anymore? And I said, well, my research productivity is pretty low these days, but the importance of the college to who we are historically, I think cannot be overlooked. I know Dean Gildersleeve is going to talk about the future of education, how we retool for a different world, how we look at the world post-COVID, high tech, with increasing income disparity being in all of our eyesights. He'll weave in, I'm fairly sure, in my conversations with him in the past, how the College of Ed fits within our University of Opportunity mission. It is probably one of the most important things that we do as Eastern Michigan University. And obviously, as I see young student teachers and students doing practicum work in schools that desperately need that view of, I need representation to show me that there is a model for me to be the next teacher, the next principal, the next counselor. I know that's fundamentally important to Ryan and to all the faculty who are here. Community engagement clearly is part of, I think, everything that Dean Gildersleeve does, and much of what all of us in this room know to be fundamental to who we are and what we want to see as a future. I will also say that Ryan is an exceptional scholar. He is a thinker, he is a visionary, and I said he's going, this is my little note here, well suited to raising questions, which means in my mind, we will leave with more questions than we will with answers. But that's exactly what a good ed talk is, walking away with more questions than we have answers. Now I will do two shameless plugs that he won't do. If you have not read his book, Transformation of the University, Hopeful Futures for Higher Education, it is a co-authored and done with a friend and colleague in Denmark. And he says that's not his favorite though. Fracturing Opportunity, Mexican Migrant Students and College Going Literacy is his favorite. And I'm hoping to find that on Amazon, and maybe if I'm really nice to him, I can get it autographed. So as you're writing notes, there are a couple of to be read pieces that I would encourage you. And I did bring paper to take some notes as well. So Ryan, I think I speak for all of us. We look forward to this. Thank you for doing it. Dr. Graywall, thank you for teeing it all up. And I will get out of the way and we'll get to work. Thank you all.
Thank you, President Smith. I would also like to thank Dr. Gildersleeve for envisioning and enacting this gathering and dialogue, which also happens to be his inaugural event at EMU. So welcome and thank you, Dr. Gildersleeve. All yours.
You need
Maybe
a
a
mic
nice
up.
round warm of applause.
All right, can everybody hear me with the lapel mic? Great, I forgot to mic up before we started. Well, first, thank you, Dr. Graywall, for that lovely introduction. We are so honored to get to learn from your wisdom. And I'm so pleased that the crowd here today and the folks on Zoom had the opportunity to learn from your wisdom as well. So much appreciation there. And thank you, President Smith. In fact, I am just that shameless and do have a plug for each of those books later in the presentation, in fact, but I appreciate you teeing that up as well as for your ongoing support for the College of Education in particular, and our engagement today. So thank you, everyone. I have, as you see, some mighty notes in my hand. I write better, I think better when I write than when I speak oftentimes. I will try to go back and forth as much as possible, but there are certain things I just really like when I write them out. So I'll try to be as interactive as I can. I want to start by saying thank you, and thank you all for being here today, the folks in the room, the folks on Zoom, and for continuing the extraordinarily warm welcome that my husband Rod and I have felt since joining the College of Education and Eastern Michigan University this summer, just about at our 4-month anniversary, I think. And it's been incredible so far. I'm really excited for our work together and so grateful for the opportunity to learn and to think together today and this afternoon. I want to express appreciation for the support from our university's leadership. President Smith, Provost Longworth has been an incredible supporter of our college. The regents, including Regent Chair Eunice Jeffries, who was one of the first leaders to reach out and say, hey, let's grab coffee together and talk about the future of education at EMU. I am also deeply honored at the number of emeritus faculty who have reached out and either indulged me with a coffee or a lunch, or who made the effort to be here tonight, or who made the effort to be here on Sunday when our 100th anniversary of our KDP chapter was celebrated, or who are able to join us on Zoom this afternoon as well. The commitment to the institution and to our college through the work of our emeriti is indeed outstanding and incredible, and I think a real hallmark of what it means to be part of the College of Education here and stands apart from other spaces. I'm also deeply honored that Dean Emeritus Jerry Robbins found suitable to join us this afternoon. I'm trying to find Jerry, and there he is in the crowd. He probably doesn't want the attention, but let's give it to him anyway. It's the achievements of our alumni and our emeriti and our former leadership that have brought us to this moment in the history of the College of Education. And the firm footing that you've provided us strengthens our imagination for continuing to lead in your legacy. And with that, I want to move into a few more moments of appreciation and express gratitude. It takes a lot of folks to run things on a daily basis, much less to do something special like we're trying to do today. So before we get rolling along too far, I want to take a moment to express my gratitude and appreciation for the village of support that helped make today happen. You can see a lengthy list of people and groups from EMU in the left column that have been instrumental in preparing for today. And an addition that I'd like to add to that is Avery, who's sitting back in the booth and who I had the opportunity to meet with earlier today, and deeply appreciative for your time as well today, Avery. Thank you. On the right column, I always like to also pay tribute and appreciation to the folks who have most influenced my thinking and helped shape the ideas that I'm offering up today through my work. And outside of EMU, you'll find mentors, collaborators, and inspiration makers that have in some way helped shape and bring forth and form to the work. So thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. I saw Jennifer smirking. I saw Dr. LaRose Murphy, yes. All right. A quick note, however, for all of those who are on Zoom, we are not going to be able to take questions during our Q&A from the folks joining us online, unfortunately. However, if you would like to email the College of Ed with your question or compliment, right? Or then please feel free to do so, and I will do my best to respond within about a week's time, I hope. If you have something other than a question or a compliment to offer, I have a different email that you can send that to. That will appear at the end of the slideshow. All right, the title of my talk today is Community Plus Value and the Future of Education. I think it's an incredibly pertinent time to be re-examining how do we establish value for education, as well as the value of education. And as I'll work through the rest of the presentation, it's no surprise, community and how we think community is fundamental to that. However, since this event is not only about the intellectual contributions of the talk, but also an introduction for me as the dean of our college and to our College of Ed community, I thought I'd take just a few moments to share a bit of biography with you first. I am a mean Flat Stanley creator. If anybody has small children who are doing Flat Stanleys, I never say no. But on a more serious note, I'll just review a few things about myself in case you're of interest. I attended my undergraduate studies at Occidental College in Los Angeles, where I was a theater major and an English and comparative literary studies minor. I was a directing and design emphasis. Do not anticipate or up the game for expectations on the acting side. But and then I followed up with a MA in higher education organizational change and a PhD in education from UCLA. Prior to joining EMU, I've held academic or leadership positions at Iowa State University, University of Texas at Arlington, the University of Denver, Colorado Mountain College, and the Spencer Foundation. I've edited journals. My scholarship generally is focused on educational opportunity for historically marginalized communities with empirical projects, empirical. It's like the opposite of what I mean. Empirical project. I think I didn't need notes for this part. I've been doing it for a long time. Empirical projects focused are grounded in cultural analyses of college access, discursive analyses of education policy, and philosophical analyses of the purposes of higher education, with a fair amount of methodological research and work across the years too. Whether empirical, methodological, or philosophical, my scholarly projects most often have been in partnership and most likely with Latinx migrant communities. I'll let it sink in. It's cute. Like all of us, however, there's so much more than the professional biography and the places I've worked and where I've studied. I am also a husband and a partner. I am a brother and a son. I am a pretty fabulous and proud uncle. I like hiking and skiing and food and modern art and architecture for those who could join us in the gallery earlier today. I am on Team Brittany and have been since the meltdown in 2005, which I think anybody 10 years later can appreciate and perhaps take some new perspective on. My favorite book is The Color Purple, and I still try to watch Grey's Anatomy on Thursday nights as often as possible, even though it's a horrible show now. I also have the highest grossing action movie star's autograph hanging on my office wall from the 90s. And if anybody wants to hear more about that, please come by and visit. But I also like to share with folks, I was born in the Bay Area of California. I was raised in the desert of Tempe, Arizona, and I was educated in Los Angeles, or La La Land, as some people like to point out. That will all hopefully perhaps make some better sense as to why I would bring attention to it in a little bit. And if not, we can chat during the reception and I can sort of elucidate more on that. But I do like to share with folks that my father was a mechanic and a small business owner. My mother was an educator and a nationally certified teacher. My brother is currently a history professor living in Northern Virginia, raising my favorite niece and nephew. My best friend is a mindfulness educator and entrepreneur and lives in San Diego, raising my also favorite nieces and nephew. And my partner and husband is a college admissions counselor and ed tech entrepreneur. My family grounds me in what matters most for a purpose-driven life and career. I also like to share that I lost my first mentor to HIV/AIDS when I was 19. Joel is his name. And I'm around the same age as Matthew Shepard, who we lost in my junior year of college. And learning this, so I went to college in the 90s. Learning to be gay in the 90s meant learning to live with fear. Fear that love could cost us our lives, and if not through disease, then from hate. Over 32,000 other people died from AIDS the year that we lost Joel. He just happened to be the one person that I knew personally. And there were at least 33 other LGBTQ people murdered in anti-gay hate crimes in 1998 across the only 16 localities at the time that tracked and recorded them. Matt just happened to be the gay victim that America finally felt sorry enough to feel sorry about. I share these losses not to paint a tragic picture at all, but to illustrate the context of coming to know in relation to broader systems and institutions that has framed my development as a scholar and as a leader. To share a little bit of my story that informs my commitments to reforming institutions, to support diverse coalitions, and contribute in dismantling systems of oppression. And I carry the legacies of Mexican and Mexican-American migrant youth and their families, whom I've had the honor and responsibility to join in the struggle for educational equity throughout my education and educational career. In each of these experiences, this queer working middle-class kid from Tempe, Arizona, and diverse teams and groups of Latinx, Black, AAPI, Indigenous, and migrant backgrounds entangled with one another's development out of our shared commitment to become more fully human within one another. These experiences generated hope and helped me survive the paradigm of fear that had plagued my development as a gay man from working middle-class backgrounds. And we did this in spite of the systems that are designed to keep us apart. In many respects, we should have never crossed paths, much less met, much less cared for one another. We should not have come to rely on one another. We should not have ever been entangled in one another. And yet, through education and difference, we did. And we were made better for it. I came to call these collections of experiences in my life moments of migrant magic, moments that the improbable and sometimes impossible were brought into being and becoming. This exceptionality to the systems of oppression that I hold in tension with the fear that those systems instilled in me growing up is what guides my leadership as Dean of the College of Education. I want to continue building capacity for such exceptionality to become normal, our new normal. I want to continue for us to make magic together. And magic is needed in and through education now more than ever. So enough about me at this point. Let's get into the ideas and the doings that we might engage in order to make some of that magic, shall we? Thank you. Community plus value and the future of education. How much hubris can one title encapsulate? Am I right? Like, might as well have called it, I know everything, thank you, and good night. But what I'm actually hoping, by the time I will finally stop talking at some point, 3 hours or so from now, we might actually recognize it's not really hubris, but rather humility that might renew our social imperative as educators together. And while the big concepts in the title begin with community, I'm actually going to work backwards through them in order to map a cartography of hope and perhaps some magical becomings in the time that by the time we get to the Q&A. Much of the thinking I'm going to share with you tonight has been informed by work that was captured in my latest book, and this is why it's really funny that the president thinks I'm not so shameless. I am proud of this book and having co-edited it with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Soren Bengtsen from the Center for Higher Education Futures at Aarhus University in Aarhus, Denmark. The book is called Transformation of the University. It's a largely speculative analysis of what could take place if we combined deliberative thought with contemplative action in education and higher education in particular, which is a good reminder. While the title for my talk references the future of education, I want to come clean right now. I'm really talking about education as a social institution, inclusive of higher education, of colleges and universities, schools and districts, state departments and policy organizations, really any learning-centered activity and institution that takes responsibility for that activity. And to be especially clear, I've oriented most of what follows to really hone in on the role that colleges of education can play in the future of education, and particularly how we in education might establish our value in that future. We're fairly certain that education will be called on to face problems in the 21st century, like problems that we have not seen before. The rapid pace of technological change, the empowerment of multinational economic organizations, and interdependency of the global economy alongside its local implications, not to mention climate change and social consequences of climate-related yet human-induced disasters. Contemporary examples of how these problems take form and shape include the wars in Ukraine and Ethiopia, our failed responses to gun violence in US schools, racial disparities in educational opportunity, and the battles over science, civics, and academic freedom that we see pervading across the country today. Looking to education as a partner in addressing the concerns that such a dynamic engenders is certainly appropriate, yet daunting. For education as a social institution needs to also be held accountable for producing social inequality as much as it holds promise for ameliorating it. Education has been and continues to be a site for racism to find expression, for sexism to foster discrimination, for lines of inequality to be drawn into the fabric of how we come to know ourselves, each other, and the world, and built into the daily practices of our lives, built into how we learn how to learn. And yet, education as a social institution also holds tremendous promise and therefore responsibility, awesome obligation for ontologically shifting our condition. And what I mean by ontologically is that through education, we can work to engender equity in the most basic building blocks of humankind, in how we learn. And there are basic realities that we need to face as we seek to engender equity in and through education. Whether our local concern is in the teacher shortage or the basic needs of students, families, as well as faculty and staff living through poverty, or the radically discriminatory conditions for learning-centered activity across neighborhoods, townships, cities, and counties, or the recognized yet rarely realized challenges of needing to provide context-driven, differentiated, and asset-based education across our neighborhoods, townships, cities, and counties. Paramount in our present condition is a need to recognize that students have changed. Therefore, learning and teaching must change. Therefore, education must change. And yet, we seem to be at a loss as to how and what. Our current value propositions don't provide much direction here. We have organized around a value that doesn't really serve nor reflect the call for education to rise to the challenges laid before us. So I'd like to revisit how we think about the value of education, zeroing in for a moment on higher education and how that relates to its purpose and what such a relationship might mean for communicating the two entangled concepts of purpose and value in order to meet the challenges of the 21st century in democracy. Without going into too much depth about the purposes of education or of higher education, I want to offer a simple understanding of the relationship between purpose and value. Purpose for any social institution is defined in reciprocity between the institution and broader society. However, it is generally expressed institutionally in the practices and outcomes of the actual institution itself. Value for a social institution, like education, is for the most part defined in others, in the use and material effects made known for and to people external of the institution. And such value is expressed reciprocally. The institution demonstrates its practices and effects, the things it does and the knowledge it creates and the graduates that come from it. But these things can only be bestowed value in the reciprocal relationship with society. I want to point out that within this schema, there is only one dimension that the institution itself has control over, its expression of its purpose. So if purpose and value are both contingent on others, those external to the institution, then how and why can those of us concerned with education make sense of and communicate its value? There are some traditional expressions, particularly for higher education. We think about it largely in two different forms, either the private and individual benefits, which are, I'm not dismissing their importance and their significance, they are. But for example, we use statistics like, typically speaking, you get a 12 to 14% ROI on your higher education. Or we say things like, you'll earn on average greater than $1 million more than those without a college degree. And we know this, and these data haven't really changed all that much. And when they do, they tend to move up, not down. These analyses remain truthful. Despite however many stories that public radio or Fox News or the New York Times do on the rising costs of college, the student loan crisis, or the theater major living with 2 roommates that can't afford to buy a new car or a house at age 26. Hashtag who needs to buy a new car or a house at 26? That was like the concern of an NPR story recently, you know. I added the theater major part, so layer things. We also think about the value, particularly of higher education, in terms of social benefits. This is another, though sometimes less popular expression. We think about things like civic health, like lower crime rates, like increased employment and stronger consumers. We think about questions of wellness and how those correlate to higher education. I put forward that these are really 2 sides of the same coin. For even these social outcomes rely on producing particular kinds of individuals. The production of college graduates, the production of an educated body, plugged into a global economy. We know that these expressions of value. We're very familiar with them. We've studied them, many of us, and continue to study their unchanging, unflinching natures, finding the same things over and over and over. It's a very good science. I think we need to start thinking about higher education's value, the college of education's value, education's value writ large, in relationship to community. So I want to spend a good deal of time next outlining a proposition that we establish our value as a university, as a college of education, as a social institution in relation to community. Now, I am not the first nor even the loudest to talk about educational value and community. There are long-standing traditions of higher ed and its relationship to the public. And these traditions each lay some claims to value in some way. For example, we have public engagement offices. We engage in public-private partnerships. Some institutions are even designated with outreach as part of their very charter. Think about the land grant institutions from the Morrill Act and the Hatch Act. The Carnegie classification system, which is a system of university classification efforts, even has a special designation for institutions that make community engagement a hallmark of their mission. I support that. But I don't want to debate these as good or bad conceptions of community. I will say, however, they're not what I have in mind. For starters, each of these efforts generally conceive of community as something other than the university. And they assume the university or the college of education as the referent and the community as exterior. But what if we don't? Most of us think of community in terms of a broadly shared commons, something relational, but also proprietary. We think of community as a spatial property of relations across people. We use metaphors like the social body or the corporation. In Latin, community, Latin, I don't know where that came from. Community might be thought of conceptually as the res publica, the republic, if you will. Again, still not the community that I want us to think about when thinking about the value of education and how to express that value and what that means for our future. Because in our 21st century, the problems that education is called upon to address are supra res publica. They transcend the republic, the nation state, the community as shared property. So I have been working with this notion of the cum munis. What if instead we think of community not as shared property, not as a body that is greater than the sum of its parts, and not as a corporation, but rather going back to its etymological beginnings. The cum munus. Roberto Esposito, a political philosopher out of Italy, has studied the etymology of community, of the cum munus, and he suggests we think community differently, as a void, a debt, a gift to the other that constitutes an obligation. If we think of community as the void, or debt, or gift, we must inherently recognize the constitutive alterity of ourselves. What I mean by that is we must see our own otherness produced by our obligation building with each other. Here I present a new opportunity for defining and expressing the value of higher education, of the College of Education, an immaterial communitas, a void, debt, or gift that obligates the other to a future and further exchange. And to be clear, in this thinking, I'm thinking that education, be we think about the university or the College of Education or the school or the summer outreach programs, we are the entities with the obligation. We have received the gift. It is the College of Education at EMU that is obliged, and the gift, the originating gift, was the originating gift of authority for the knowledge imperative of academia and society. The gift was the trust to engage children, families, groups in learning-centered activity, like school, like classes, like advanced degrees in education. So we then need to ask, what is it that we lose without education? What debt does education endow that generates greater recognition of the other? How will education enter the void it was obligated to fill? How do we need educational institutions like the College of Education to oblige the debt of its constitution? Culturally, politically, scientifically, humanistically, and yes, economically. The cum munus version of community can generate a new form of value, a new metric by which to define and express the value of education. The community. To shed a little more light on how I'm trying and often struggling to think community differently, and why it might be useful in imagining and enacting the future of education. I want to take a quick little detour through contemporary Italian political philosophy, specifically the project of Roberto Esposito. Roberto Esposito puts forward that we operate from a paradigm of the immunitas, or an immunity paradigm. And what he's speaking about here is that we seek an immunization from the loss of ourself, the loss of security, the loss of property in particular. That as self-enterprising individuals, we seek to immunize ourselves from the exterior, from exterior corruption or corrosion or just basic influence. We are in a self-preservation mode with a desire to immunize against any infiltration of otherness. Whereas communitas, or the cum munus and an immanent community, is, as I put forward before, a gift or a void or a gift that begets an obligation. Unlike an allogenic gift model of blood donation, and unlike a potlatch gift model that requires us to give, to receive, and to reciprocate, the obligation of the munus is in the giving. It's oscillating between office and obligation and gift, shifting our attention from proper and common to duty and gratuity. An obligation, but without expectation of reciprocity. I owe you, but you don't owe me. At the individual level, what we owe to the community is our identities, exposing us to the contagion of a relation with others. We have no property rights to the university or its contents, including knowledge. The College of Education has no property rights to our partnerships. The knowledge imperative then is subject to generating community in order to survive. Imperative, becoming knowledge, then becomes community, free from proprietary constraints, out of our obligation to give. This all, for Roberto Esposito, is under the guise of what he's searching for in what he terms an affirmative biopolitics. And so if we think of immune, and what he means by that, I'll get to in a second, because those are like two crazy words to be throwing out there. But biopolitics, so just think about the politics related to life. Affirmative meaning like something that's productive, right? Not destructive. But too often in the immunity paradigm, what we're trying to immunize ourselves against is a politics over life. The control of what an educated person is, the control and property rights of what it means to become something, the control of which it means to become educated, right? As opposed to, in an affirmative biopolitics, a politics of life, which in many senses could be taking the gifts of technology to innovate life and mixing that with politics to mitigate the hubris of that technology, to present a communitarian technology of life as opposed to over. Bear with me, we're getting somewhere, I promise. I hope I gendered enough goodwill with the baby picture. So bringing us back to communitas and community plus value. An immanent community through which we establish value for education. What would this get us? If we are, as Esposito suggests, operating in a default immunitas, a paradigm of immunity, a zeitgeist of protectionism, well, that helps explain the radical separatist, isolationist, and inward-looking dynamic that we see blossoming into many of the ills we are fighting in education today, such as censorship, whitewashing, gaslighting, victim blaming, race baiting, systemic inequality in the foundations of learning, and a resurgence of deficit ideology to explain away the systemic struggles induced by a society that is inequitable by design. In our society, the very best immunity is wealth accumulation. And the best way to accumulate wealth for oneself is to systematically deny it for others, and to do so in our everyday lives so that it becomes harder and harder to diagnose, to build it into our learning. Who would blame me for wanting to send my kid, for living where the schools score better on statewide tests? Who can blame me for buying coffee at the multinational chain that gives me stars and a shot of dopamine every time I buy a drink, falsely thinking that I'm earning some reward? The antidote then is a radical orientation of our value established in community, a communitas, wherein the College of Education does not have a community. The College of Education is not exterior to community. The College of Education is of community, which then affords us a politics of life rather than over life, and ethics demanding we build learning through diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, learning to save the world. So returning to the future of education, orienting our organization and action in Communitas calls for an expansive notion of the College of Education community, calls for us to institutionalize Communitas, calls for us to deploy the knowledge imperative of academe in action for social justice in and through education. What does this really mean or look like? An expansive community includes our students and our staff and our faculty. Absolutely. It also includes our broader university communities, student affairs offices, the registrar's office, McNair Fellows, Honors College, Library, Faculty Development Center. It also includes and is constituted in part by our practice communities, our schools, our clinics, colleges and universities, healthcare settings, after school and out of school, district offices, legislative and executive offices. It also means we are constituted in part by our constituent communities, our families, our alumni, our emeriti, our philanthropic partners, our research practice outreach partners, and that we owe this obligation in part to be constituted by our geographic communities, our neighbors, Ypsilanti, Detroit, the Detroit Metro, Washtenaw County and Southeast Michigan, state of Michigan and the Midwest region. Part of the challenge and expectation for colleges of education then is to find ways for us to institutionalize Communitas with this expansive notion of the community. So what are we going to do and what are we currently doing in the College of Education? For one thing, we are building on our rich history of innovation, of partnership, and of leadership partnership that has been part of our Constitution since we were the Michigan Normal School in 1849. We are also, I'm really proud to announce, starting with a leadership legacy initiative in which we're dedicating $100,000 this year and next year to ideas springing forth from our faculty, staff, and students to think about what's the next iteration of the College of Education's leadership legacy needs to take form, shape, and look like. Ideas that hopefully will spring forth in partnership and deep collaboration that engender the community of Communitas that we're seeking to establish our value in. For another thing, it is also my goal that we institutionalize community engagement in pursuit of Communitas so that partnership within our expansive notion of the College of Ed community becomes secondhand and easy and normal, while also still providing a mode of innovation and addressing our most urgent needs in education. In short, we need to support our partnerships in ways that don't just make our partners feel like they belong in the COE, but more so in ways that make our partners, as well as ourselves, our leadership, our faculty, and our staff, recognize that the COE belongs to them. It belongs to the Communitas, the communities of the College of Education. And so I'm also pleased to share that we will begin exploring a new and first of its kind for the College of Education executive level personnel for community in early 2023. In further efforts to institutionalize community engagement in pursuit of Communitas, we need to instrumentalize our procedures and orientation to this establishment of value. For example, including community in various expressions in any and all faculty staff hiring and any further incentives and initiatives that we might pursue. In establishing our value via Communitas, we empower our knowledge imperative as educational institutions to achieve and engender equity and social justice. Future efforts that I can promise you will see from the EMU College of Education include a working group to help us move beyond land acknowledgement and our obligation to the void, debt, and gift of the indigenous communities without whose sacrifice we wouldn't be able to be here thinking and talking and learning about education today. There will be transparent funding dedicated to DEI and justice in and from multiple sources in the College of Education, and an ongoing effort to engage in learning and teaching together with all of our partners as we build our mutual communitas in collaboration to establish value in education toward addressing society's big problems, even as they emerge in small humans. I don't have much more to add, other than I hope that I've provoked more questions than provided answers this afternoon. Questions that I would eagerly love the honor and opportunity to pursue with you and to bring about as a steward of the College of Education. So thank you. Dr. Graywall has kindly agreed to facilitate our Q&A this afternoon so that I can just take a breather for a hot second and maybe move away from the podium for a moment.
Get the hard job of answering the questions. So brilliant, right? Right? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. You know, it's an outstanding talk when you say, wow, I never thought about certain aspects in this way. And then you get excited and then you go, wow, he's actually doing something about this. He's not just presenting brilliant ideas, but there are concrete steps on how we're going to achieve. Somebody who begins the talk brave enough to be vulnerable, uses words like hope, in community and love. Absolutely brilliant. We are so indebted, Dr. Gildersleeve. So open for questions. I'm happy to bring the mic down. We have one hand up. So please do think of questions. Okay, here we go. Do you want to...
So I am Ray. I'm actually a student here, a second year in the College of Ed. One of the questions I have for you, because I know that you talked about having students put in input. I guess the question there, well, I have two technically. One, how do you plan on letting them know that they are able to give suggestions, and how are you going to let them know that you're considering or even implementing those suggestions once they're given to you?
I thank you, Ray. I appreciate you bringing that question up. Thank you, Dr. Lancaster. We need to build a stronger infrastructure in our College of Education for student voice and for student participation. And I don't mean just input, Ray. I mean leadership as well. There will be opportunities for students to say, we want to see this and we want to be the ones doing this, right? In collaboration, with support, alongside or betwixt our faculty, our staff, our partners, the schools we work with, the districts we value, the clinics and the healthcare settings that we operate in. So it will not just be input. Input will be there. That's the baseline for us. But there will be leadership opportunity as well in this notion. That infrastructure, we know that we need to find a way. We have lots of small student organizations in the college right now, but we don't have student representation on the dean's leadership team. And we don't have a student org that brings together leaders from all the different student orgs. And we don't have a ritualized, and what I mean by that is an anticipated and regular forum for which students can look forward to, or at least plan on, coming together with the leadership of the college and whatnot. I know our programs do this at the level of the individual program, right? And a lot of our programs have great student activities going on all the time, and student groups that are meeting, whether formally or informally, but we need to build that infrastructure out. Part of what we're going to do, part of what we need is to strengthen our Office of Academic Services, not because the people in there are weak, but because we're down on personnel right now. And they're the hardest working people in the building on any given day with what they're facing currently. And we have found a pathway forward to begin those steps of repopulating those positions with talented people who will need to demonstrate their commitment to community, the College of Education as being of community. From there, I think that's the space where we'll locate the node of engagement for establishing that infrastructure. In the meantime, we're figuring out before the end of this term how to issue a call for nominations for at least 2, if not more, student representatives to the Dean's leadership team. And that's a group of positional leaders across the college that get together once a month to inform our practices and our designs and how we were running the college at any given time. Thank you for the question.
Hi, my name is Trudy Adler. I'm president of the Alumni Association Board of Directors, and no, I don't work here. I'm a volunteer, and I'm really intrigued by the executive level personnel for community engagement. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like? And as a social worker, that's particularly intriguing to me.
Yeah, so I can't name exactly the role yet, but I can say what we hope such a role could help us pursue. And that is streamlining processes for engaging with organizations, for engaging with community partners, for engaging with schools and districts in sustainable ways, and having protocols in place so that if there's a new assistant professor who wants to get to know various types of spaces or organizations in the community, or who has long-standing relationships with a Metro Detroit community and wants to bring that to bear on their work in the College of Ed, that we've got a designated person at the executive level who can say, I can support you in making that happen, who will work through, I mean, universities by design have to be massive bureaucracies, right? What I appreciate a lot about EMU is that our massive bureaucracy still manages to operate at a human scale. But if you're new, or if you're not on this campus every day, you don't know which human you need to be engaging with, right? So this will be that designated human who not only will be responsive to, but proactive, and a space at the executive level where we can also do our own reviews of our engagement work, of our partnership, to make sure that we are honoring on our partners' terms what that partnership looks like and how it emerges. Those are the sort of things that I'm imagining. So somebody who can be responsible for drafting MOUs and supporting our faculty, our staff, and our students in figuring out what that needs to look like. Somebody who can run interference and between various offices that are all doing their best to do their best, but might not know that what they're doing really good is contrary to what somebody else is doing that's really good. And having that designated person at the executive level to be like, hey, I know this person, I know that person. I'm going to call these two people and we'll figure this out together, as opposed to somebody who maybe doesn't spend as much time on our campus on a regular basis, or somebody whose area of responsibility is outside of those two other spaces, trying to just wait for another email reply, right? So somebody designated to know stuff, to respond to stuff, and to make stuff happen in the first place.
Outstanding, Ryan. Thank you for the opportunity of being here.
Thank you, Ken.
I'm intrigued by your concept of institutionalizing communitas. And I noticed that, and I applaud you for helping us to grasp a different concept of community. And as I think about you're breaking down the different forms of communities, I looked at those and thought, in a way, the reason they had to be broken down was because they had been institutionalized in ways that established boundaries that precluded the very objectives that you were talking about. And so as we look at institutionalizing communitas, how, as we move forward, can we avoid the very act of institutionalization, creating the boundaries that you're trying to avoid?
That's a brilliant question.
Yes. I mean, I deeply appreciate the astute observation of part of what has made why we have to break down those other notions, because they've been institutionalized. They are what's normal. They are how we've learned to learn in that sense, right? So how do we avoid setting up boundaries that will then reenact a fixity, right? How do we make sure that communitas remains porous and flexible and dynamic rather than institutionalized in a static nature, right? I think that comes through, in some ways, how we procedurize the establishment of something like an executive level personnel responsible for community, which means it's not a lifetime appointment, right? Which means it probably should have a certain percentage of its time dedicated to rethinking the things and reviewing and reevaluating, reassessing things that we believe are already awesome, that we love dearly, right? And cling to because they give us our sense of self, right? Which if we hold too hard to them, then reify immunity from what they prevent us to see or do or engage with, right? So part of it is how we structure that institutionalization so that it's built in to have like a self-critique, right? Or an institutional critique itself, right? It will also take that we as a college of education community hold one another accountable to that. It's a shift in ethic as much as it is in procedure and policy, right? And that ethic has to exist beyond and transcend our procedure and our policy and our personnel designs. It has to be part of how we come to know what it means to be a part of the College of Education community. And that means we have to open that up, that expansive community, to say, if you're a superintendent in Michigan, you are part of the College of Education community. If you are a philanthropic partner operating in the world of learning, you are a College of Education community. You are part of the College of Education community. If you are a parent, etc., right? And that's where I mean, it's not pretty. It's gonna be messy. It's like, I hope people enjoy playing around in mud. Like think back to the baby picture, right? I should have used the one with me in the mud. But you know, and what I appreciate thus far is I've not had a conversation with a member of our faculty yet, or with one of our students, where people have said, we can't. What I've heard is, this is what we would like to do, or we want to find ways to the can. And that doesn't mean we all want the same thing, right? It doesn't mean we all have the same imagined future of the College of Education, but the pluralism that can come forth from an expansive notion of being of community, I think that is where we'll find, I mean, real opportunity for innovation. Otherwise, I will be bringing that same question to dean's meetings with you sharing where I got smacked in the face or fell flat against the wall and saying, Ken, help me, help our college. Thank you for the question, though. It's really brilliant.
So I have a very easy question for you after that one. I'm Lynette Bentley, clerk for Charter Township of Superior. I have an endowed scholarship here in the College of
Yes.
Education. My question to you is, tell me, why is The Color Purple your favorite book? It's my favorite book also, and my favorite movie anytime it comes on.
It's a book you have to read once a year. And if you don't have the time to read it because you're like working your way toward tenure, at least watch the movie. But you should read the book too. There's a section, it's like page 237, depending on what edition you're talking about, where Celie's just musing and looking on at her friend Shug. And she says something like, Shug just looked like a beautiful big rose. And then it goes on a bit, and then it has something to the effect of, and I, for once, felt like the rose was part of me, or something to that extent. I'm really radically paraphrasing here, other than that Shug looked like a big red rose. That section of the book really talks about how these two women, who also probably never should have crossed paths and become part of one another's life, constitutive parts of one another's lives, where to the extent where neither could imagine the life that they knew of themselves without the other having been part of it. And yet it then goes on to connect to broader sort of world ills and the beauty of forgiveness, which is really a core part of that book. It just struck me. I read the book first, I think, as a first-year student in college, at a time where I was like, I was just a mess, and it brought order to chaos, yet didn't relieve the chaos of existence in the first place. I'm going to follow up at the reception and ask you that same question the next. So prepare your answer. Oh, now you got to roll. It's campaign season. It's campaign season. All right.
Hi, I'm Connie Witt. I am retired staff member at COE.
Awesome.
I had the privilege of working with amazing faculty who were out in the community working with teachers. My question for you is, how do you plan to support the teachers that are out there now who are being assailed from every direction with some of the political situations that we're in?
Right.
They need support.
They do. I think first and foremost, we can't presuppose that we know what that support is, right? So we need to build ways and methods so that teachers and leaders in Lincoln Consolidated Schools know how to reach out to us, and that we are regularly in communication with them so we can hear from folks and collaborate in designing what the support should be. We need to make sure that our faculty not only find value, but are recognized as valuable when they spend their time working with teachers, working with principals, working with the staff, the frontlines folks in elementary and secondary schools who too often are not recognized as educators, and hearing while also co-designing together what support can look like. Yes, we design our curricula to make sure that we have to engage. We design our students' experiences to make sure that we have to be outside of the Porter building as much, if not more so, than we are inside the Porter building. And that has to be part of how we think about our reward structures. And that has to be part of how we recognize and organize our time together with one another. That I don't have the prescription for, right? I know what I have seen and been a part of that I have found meaningful in getting closer to that, right? I worked with a brilliant team of faculty members and staff members in one of my former departments to design what we called a praxis-driven curriculum, in which every single course, there was a requirement that we did something with a community partner. Every single course had some kind of action involved where our students were engaged in the practical application of what they were experiencing and learning. And every single course required us then to engage with partnership radically across, right? Which meant then we had to reorganize how we spent our time. It meant we didn't say, everybody come once a week for a 2-hour meeting where we go across the room and spend the entire 2 hours listening to Ryan's 5-minute report, then Amy's 5-minute report, then Manuel's 5-minute report, right? But rather those reports are done. We read them on our own. You can take it on your Kindle in the bathtub, wherever you do your best reading and thinking, and then you come to that meeting, and instead of 2 hours, it's an hour and a half. And we're talking about not what's the report, but we're talking about what is the solution that we're seeking in supporting our teachers in local schools. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Hey, Ryan.
Hi, Rob.
So I've got all sorts of thoughts ruminating through my head, going from Eastern philosophy into notions of becoming and psychology that you've kind of sparked with the conversation today. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's zero in on the Brittany.
The what?
It was a joke. I said
I missed that part.
Brittany.
Brittany?
The
Well,
Brittany.
we can have a conversation about that as well. And we're going to have far more conversations around this communitarian technology idea, because there's all sorts of things to unpack there. But what I'm trying to think through is sort of what this looks like in practice. And the image of People's Park in Berkeley is what came to my mind. And the notions of space, community space, the spaces that you grew up with, the community squares in Arizona, this notion of the void in the middle of town that would be filled with community. And when I'm thinking of People's Park in Berkeley, I also think about the issues with the university and People's Park. And so could you help me understand sort of how we could take a space like People's Park and incorporate it into notions of community with universities, which have particular ideologies at this point that, as you've said, need to be deconstructed?
Yes. Everyone's giggling. It's a lovely word. So there's a few things I think that we need to recognize as like a priori differences. One is the hubris of the University of California at Berkeley that I don't think we indulge in here. At the same time, that doesn't mean 4 months. It doesn't mean, however, that we don't, by the inheritance of working at a university, carry forth some of those absolute assumptions that we then reify as realities of difference and see them as immutable, right? Or of presuppositions of who's what and who's for what and what is who for, right? So absolutely, I see that. I don't have a clear-cut answer to you because I think that is the work of engendering and building communitas together, right? That is what we need to throw down as perhaps challenge number one to configure with one another, and deciding sort of how do we make sure we don't draw lines that can't be erased when they no longer work toward those shared communitarian techniques. So the other issue, I think, is even the square, even People's Park, still operates in a proprietary paradigm. It belongs to some people, but not to other things, right? It doesn't belong to the birds. It doesn't belong to the squirrels. Although if you were to talk to a squirrel in Berkeley, it will tell you that you're the one who doesn't belong, right? And so, I struggle with saying like, let's establish a people's park in Ipsy and see what happens, right? But if you're thinking metaphorically in the, like, let's establish the space, I think that's the work ahead of us. And I want you to lead and design those structures with the partners that you are engaged with, that you see contributing to the notion of a college of ed community. Thank you.
Say that Missy is my ringtone. I do want to tell you that, Ryan. So let me see if I can formulate this. So I am the theater part of the degree in the vocation. Hi, Glenna. I understand in transformation as building and owning what is first. That's how I define the idea of transformation. And given that you are your framing of community is of community. What initiatives, programs, and possibilities have you seen here that are of community and could be transformed, built upon, that are within your college or beyond, that you, because a lot of the presentation felt tabula rasa to me, if I'm being candid, which I just did. But so given that, maybe not tabula rasa, what here in this space and place in your 4 months in your journey? I'm seeing my colleague Ethan and I have Iman and some of their of community possibilities and programs. How do you see them becoming part of your communitas?
Our.
Sorry, our. I'm a they person and an us person, but yeah.
Well, I mean, you stole the example of Ethan and Semi's right away, but yes. And then there's Iman's work with Project Hope and the Next Scholars. There is the reading project that Jackie runs at Estabrook. There's the work that Philip Caldwell is doing around school finance, public school finance, and the way that he is engaging policymakers and the broader public and how we think about school finance. There's a rich well of resource in the College of Ed already that has been built up over the legacy of how this college at this institution has always been a leader. We're simply shifting the dial a little bit of what we want that leadership, how we want that leadership to be recognized, and who we want included in the recognition of that leadership. So like tabula rasa, I absolutely agree with for the presentation, recognizing it's to a really broad audience today, right? We've got folks online all over the country and have invited folks, many of whom I'm pleased to see here today, who probably have not been on campus in many, many, many years, right? So, but no, absolutely, we are standing on really good, firm footing as a college. And not just in the College of Ed, but across campus. So thank you.
Ryan, I think that's about time for the questions. I did want to take a moment and recognize Provost Longworth, who is here in the audience. She was busy solving an emergency. So thank you for being here in support of Dr. Gildersleeve. Thank you again for a brilliant speech. And I know what I'm taking away most from your speech is your reframing of the value of education as what we owe. And that really significantly flips the grid for me. And it's got me so engaged and curious and intrigued. And I thank you for that, because that's a remarkable shift in mindset from what the community owes us to what what do we owe with the knowledge that we do have to service our community? And thank you again for all of the work you've done in the 4 short months to support all of the community engaged work that is going on in the college. You day one, stepped in, reached out to each of us, figured out what we're doing and said, how can I support? And that means a lot. So, and thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. Let's continue this conversation in the reception. So thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.